The question before us today is a very broad one. How are humans motivated, and can we seek out any patterns there? What we learn here will be applicable to both producers and consumers, but in this video we'll be focusing mostly on consumer behavior. So what motivates us? Are there any patterns that we can use to make sense of the world? The big question will be, are we rational? We'll assume for now that for the most part, producers and consumers are rational, but we'll have more to say on this later. And the blessing, or some would say the curse of modern humans, is that there's a lot of choice involved in our daily lives. Unlike our ancestors who had authority or tradition or necessity guiding everyday decisions, we don't. Our overall objectives for this lesson are basically to think like an economist, to see cost-benefit analysis everywhere, to learn basically the idea of the optimizing rule, to be able to say it in your own words, and to be able to derive marginal benefits and marginal utility when we're given total benefits or total utility. So, let's start digging in. Some underlying assumptions that will be helpful. We are all optimizing individuals. We're going to make the assumption that not only are we fairly rational, but we seek to make ourselves better off rather than worse off. And the assumption is that we do this in a fairly methodical way, that we weigh the costs against the benefits of all our decisions in order to do that optimization. And finally, that there's this idea that we are programmed, we're naturally inclined to maximize our happiness, our satisfaction, whatever you want to call the benefits of our behavior and our consumption. So we need to define something here. The term marginal is important in economics. Marginal simply means extra or incremental, and it's important because most of our decisions happen at the margin, or in other words, in the decision-making process we are faced with, should we order another lemonade? And so the extra benefit is what we are concerning ourselves with. And it's worth noting that this sort of decision-making is important for producers as well. Not only are consumers asking themselves how much should they buy, they're thinking about their marginal benefit, but producers are also wondering how much they should sell, how much lemonade to stock in this little stand, how much to produce, and of course they're going to be doing the same marginal benefit versus marginal cost decision that most of us are doing every day without realizing it. So marginal benefit is kind of a generic term. It can be used for producers, for consumers, as well as marginal cost. Let me tell you a specific term that we're going to use for consumers' benefit. When consumers sip a glass of lemonade, there's the particular benefit that consumers get, the happiness they get, the satisfaction they get from sipping that lemonade is called utility. So for consumers, marginal benefit is called marginal utility. We'll have a different word for what the benefit for producers is for selling that lemonade later. The marginal cost for consumers is how much they pay for that lemonade. Let's say they bought it for 50 cents at a lemonade stand. That would be the marginal cost of one more glass of lemonade. So to recap, we believe there's a pattern in consumption whereby as we consume more and more of a good, the extra benefit, or now we're calling it the marginal utility, diminishes over time. So we're calling this the law of diminishing marginal utility, where as our consumers eat more and more cupcakes or lemonade or whatever the good is, the additional satisfaction has to decline. So that second cupcake does bring satisfaction, but not quite as much as the first cupcake. The third cupcake, a little less than the second. Getting pretty close to overdoing it here. Let's see if that last cupcake brings him any happiness. Yeah, that last cupcake may have actually even had a negative marginal utility. If you've ever overdone some food or overdone consumption of a good, you know that there can be, we as consumers can go too far. And of course that last cupcake, if it leaves you more miserable, less happy than you were before, that is not optimizing behavior. So there's some sort of pattern we're working towards here, some rule of optimization. So to figure out the optimizing quantity of cupcakes or lemonade, we need to figure out the total pattern here. So marginal utility is what we tend to focus on, but total utility is what we're trying to maximize, right? So when we say optimizing behavior, we mean we as consumers are trying to maximize our total amount of satisfaction, and we do that by looking at how much extra benefit, extra utility versus cost that will incur for each unit. So we assume that as we eat more and more cupcakes, we'll get more and more happy. In other words, the more cupcakes we have, probably the more happy we'll be. So our total utility, as you notice, increases as our quantity increases, but it increases at a decreasing rate. So if we look at marginal utility, we know that with one cupcake we've got 15 units of happiness. This is a funny term here. Basically, if we can pretend that we measure happiness or measure satisfaction from consumption, if we could, it would be called utility, and we can actually quantify it at least abstractly. So as we consume 1, we've got 15, 2 would give us 28, 3 would give us 39, 4 would give us 48, and on and on. And that means that the first cupcake, going from 0 to 1, gave us 15 units of extra satisfaction. Building on that, the second cupcake gave us an extra 13, so after 2 cupcakes are in our belly, we've got 28 units of satisfaction. The third cupcake offers another 11, now we're at 39 total units, and you can see that on our quest for optimizing, maximizing our total utility, it'll be helpful to look at marginal utility. And indeed, marginal utility does decline as we consume more, just like the law of diminishing marginal utility suggests, but each successive unit does add to our total satisfaction, our total utility, although at a declining rate. And if we were to graph the data on this table over here, we'd get something that looks like this. That's our total utility. Of course, we know the marginal utility declines as we consume more, so that is a negatively sloped curve. And again, you can think about the relationship between marginal and total utility as that we are trying to maximize total utility by looking at marginal utility. So we haven't yet considered costs, but we know in the real world when we go to Bali's Yogurt and we decide how big of a frozen yogurt to buy, it's going to come down to the assumed benefit that we get, the marginal utility of each next bite of frozen yogurt versus the marginal cost. We do have to pay real money for that frozen yogurt. And we're going to say this in a very simple and abstract way. The best you can do is to consume the amount of yogurt where this is equal, where your marginal benefit, or we're calling it marginal utility for consumption, is exactly equal to your marginal cost. In other words, where one more bite gives you about as much satisfaction as you paid for it. If you stop before that, if you don't eat enough frozen yogurt, you are not maximizing your total utility. You can add to your total utility by consuming bites that have more extra utility in them, more marginal utility than marginal cost. Remember, we're optimizing individuals, so we're looking to make ourselves the happiest possible, and we do that by comparing the marginal utility to marginal cost. When marginal utility is very high compared to cost, we should be doing more of it because the benefit outweighs the cost, and it will add to our net benefit. So when you walk downtown and you go to Bally's, you basically are comparing your extra benefit to your extra cost when you're choosing the size of frozen yogurt that you're going to get. And it's almost as if we were programmed to think this way. This rule of the optimizing individual comparing marginal benefit to marginal cost in a lot of aspects of his or her life can be seen in the decision about how fast to go over the speed limit, how much time and effort to put into your relationships, how much time to spend in your class preparations, how much time do you spend on your fitness or on your appearance, when will you decide to get married, how many children will you have. It's a powerful rule, and it helps explain a lot of things that we'll be covering in our next few weeks. For instance, why do people buy less of something when its price rises, and vice versa? We're comparing benefits to costs. Why do producers offer more for sale when the price rises? Again, benefits and costs. So that's why, in a world with a dizzying array of choices in production and consumption, we can look to see some patterns. And those patterns are that humans, rational, self-interested, more or less humans, find that their optimal behavior is to produce or consume or study or eat to the point where the marginal benefit of that action exactly equals the marginal cost. It all boils down to that.